Anglo-Saxon metalwork and jewellery showed off their skill with fine detail, often using gold, silver and gemstones. One of the best-known finds were the Staffordshire hoard. Most famously, there was Sutton Hoo, a massive treasure trove dug up by Basil Brown in 1939. He was a self-taught archaeologist who uncovered a buried ship filled with gold, silver, weapons, and a ceremonial helmet. Though no body were found, folk believe it might have been the grave of a powerful king, like Redwald of East Anglia. Firstly, there were gold belt buckles, gilded shoulder clasps, and an ornate purse, just to name a few. The treasure found in this simple trove could rival any ornate item from any time, from anywhere in the world. It also showed off the finest techniques of gem cutting and metalwork of the period, with deep red garnets set in intricate patterns. The gold belt buckle is a brilliant example of how advanced the literary skill of the Anglo-Saxons were, showing a strong grasp of grammar and iconography. The interwoven animals on it hide about 13 creatures in plain sight: birds, snakes, and four-legged beasts. Reading this belt buckle is like cracking a puzzle, needing to be carefully decoded. Though it's not as developed as a full alphabet, it shows that early Anglo-Saxons, even before writing down Old English, were still literate in their own visual and symbolic way. The most iconic piece, though, is of course the Sutton Hoo helmet, which now stands as a symbol of Britain and the English people. Sutton Hoo bore a striking resemblance to the ship burials at Vendale and Valsgärd, from around 500 to 600 BC, just north of Uppsala in Sweden. Like Sutton Hoo, those graves held richly decorated helmets, weapons, and ornate gear, all buried within ships. The craftsmanship and style, especially the use of animal motifs and interlace patterns, were near identical, suggesting strong cultural ties between early Anglo-Saxon England and Scandinavia. This connection hints at shared beliefs, trade, and maybe even common ancestry, showing that the Anglo-Saxons didn't arrive as some isolated tribe, but as part of a much wider northern world. Historians are still baffled by how the Anglo-Saxons managed to craft such tiny, detailed designs visible only to the human eye. This level of skill showed up not just in metal and jewellery, but also in manuscripts. Some of the greatest craftsmen in human history lived in Anglo-Saxon England. Even poorer folk like peasants wore simple bronze or everyday brooches and belt buckles, showing that decoration and identity mattered across all classes. The Alfred jewel is another standout example, likely made for King Alfred himself, blending beauty with purpose. The advanced metalworking techniques of the Anglo-Saxons, like filigree and cloisonne, made it possible to create such intricate jewellery and artefacts, unmatched in their time. These carvings are examples of Anglo-Saxon stonework, where pattern, shape and symbol all played a part. The designs often mixed animals, knots and bold lines, though the meaning behind them isn't always clear. They show how stone was used not just for building, but for expression, whether for faith, memory, or something else entirely. Writing was carved straight into the surface. The shapes of the letters stand out sharp, but what they meant back then might have been clear only to a few. It's a reminder that stone wasn't just for pictures, it carried words too, though now we can't always grasp what they were trying to say. These are examples of Anglo-Saxon metalwork, where detail and shape mattered just as much as the shine. Animals and patterns were worked into the design, showing a clear eye for style and story. They weren't just for show, they likely had meaning, though now that meaning's half lost to time. These glass vessels are examples of early craft, made with care and a keen eye for shape. The colours and textures suggest they weren't just everyday items, but something special. They show that even fragile materials like glass were used to make things both useful and striking. The Anglo-Saxons were skilled in textile production, weaving intricate patterns into their clothing. The quality of the fabric and the complexity of the garments often showed a person's status. They made garments of extremely high quality, mixing silk with gold thread. Later English periods took clear inspiration from the craftsmanship of the Anglo-Saxons, especially in their use of fine materials and detailed embroidery. This influence can be seen in works like the Toledo Cope, made in the early 1300s. Rich with gold thread and silk, it reflects the same blend of skill, symbolism, and luxury that Anglo-Saxon textiles were known for centuries earlier. The Lindisfarne Gospels are one of the most famous examples of Anglo-Saxon manuscripts, recognised across the world for their beauty and craftsmanship. These books were carefully painted by hand using rich colours and gold, with elaborate borders and detailed illustrations that blended Christian imagery with Anglo-Saxon patterns. The pages often featured intricate knotwork, interlaced animals, and bold lettering, all done with remarkable precision. Early versions of board games like backgammon were played, offering both entertainment and strategy. Two of the most popular games were Tafel, which had Germanic roots, and Nine Men's Morris, inherited from Roman influence. Tafel in particular evolved over time, with many different boards and sets of rules found across Britain and beyond. These games weren't just pastimes, they reflected trade, cultural exchange, and the value placed on wit and skill, and were an art form of their very own. Anglo-Saxon architecture, mostly seen in churches and forts, had simple solid designs made with timber and stone. It showed off narrow windows, tall towers, and fancy carvings. What made Anglo-Saxon architecture stand out was how it mixed proper, useful building with detailed craftsmanship, especially in their churches. These had striking stonework, neat carvings, and early stone towers that shaped later medieval building styles. Anglo-Saxon architecture stood out for its tough, no-nonsense design mixed with surprising detail. It weren't just churches, they built halls, homes and forts too, all meant to last through harsh weather and rough times. Most buildings were simple in shape, often rectangular, with thick walls made from timber or stone, depending on what was to hand. What made it unique was how much thought went into even the plainest structures. Roofs were steep to let the rain run off quick, and buildings were often raised a bit to keep the damp out. In stonework, you'd spot long and short corners, careful carvings and strip patterns to liven up the walls. It wasn't showy, but it had a quiet pride to it, solid, clever and full of character. They also built defensively with burhs, fortified towns, set out in neat grids with ditches and banks for protection. Everything had purpose, but they still found room for craft, even in door frames or beam ends. That blend of everyday use and thoughtful design is what set Anglo-Saxon building apart. It weren't just thrown up, it was made to stand.
Be sure to check out my other channel, History Sticks, for the complete, longer and comprehensive video.